Okay, hello everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all so much for joining us today for the UC Cooperative Extension Codling Moth IPM webinar. My name is Ellie Andrews, for those of you who haven't met yet, and I serve Sonoma, Marin, and Napa counties as a UC Cooperative Extension Specialty Crops Advisor. So I get to work with apples, among many other crops. Today we're going to hear from UC Cooperative Extension IPM Advisor Dr. Jhalendra Rijal about Codling Moth Integrated Pest Management, or IPM for short. So then we'll hear from some local perspectives about what Codling Moth IPM looks like both in our region at different scales, backyard growers, commercial growers, and also nearby coastal apple and pear growing regions too, Lake and Mendocino counties and Santa Cruz area as well. So I'm really grateful for the collective expertise we're going to have in the room on this topic today. And big thank you to everyone who will be sharing their input and perspectives. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jhalendra.
Okay.
And I might need to make you a co-host so you can share your screen real quick.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Ellie, for the invitation. This is also an opportunity for me to interact with the various experts in the panel, as well as, have some feedback from the participant in here about general pest management in pear and apple, and then also maybe focusing specifically on the codling moth. So with that, let me see whether I'll be able to say it now. So my name is Jhalendra Rijal. I work in the northern San Joaquin Valley, based in Modesto, and working mostly on tree nuts, tree fruit crops. And I'm an entomologist by training, and has been with the UCNR or the UC Cooperative Extension in the last 7-8 years. So today I'm gonna talk about the codling moth, and most of the focus of my talk would be on apple. In terms of, when I go through the different aspect of IPM, I'll use the apple as an example. But at the same time, this pest is common for other crops too. So that hopefully that will relate to the other crops as well. Okay, so a little bit introduction. So codling moth, it is probably the most destructive pest in apple, pear, and globally. And then also it's a key pest in walnuts too. So if we think about the major three crops that we're dealing with also in California are apple, in my consideration, apple, pear, and also in walnuts. So other host crops include, there are some other host crops out there. Of course, they feed on multiple crops. And you can see some of the example: crab apple, quince, peach, apricot, and some other crops also. But as I mentioned, I think the focus of our discussion would be an apple, and that might hopefully related to pear as well as walnuts also. So basically, codling moth larvae, they directly feed on the fruit and cause the damage. So that's the simplest way to explain it. They lay eggs on the fruit, and sometime on the fruit, other times on the leaf. So the larvae basically go into the fruit and cause the damage. So if you looked at the codling moth, of course we call moth. So this is adult stage, and you can see about 1/2 inch long, with this coloration and this color pattern that you can see. A little bit of this coppery structure on the back of the wings. Yeah, so on the back of the wings, there is coppery structure. So that's the adult. And you can see the damage in apple. This is in a pear, and this is in walnuts. So basically feeding internally in these fruits. So a little bit background about the codling moth. As I mentioned, it's a global pest. So here in this article, you can, the kind of in this map, you can see the distribution. So here, all the sort of like the silver color that you can see in here in different places, in these different countries name. So they are the countries with the codling moth host present as well as codling moth present. So if you looked at a lot of European countries, China, also in Australia, there also we have, of course, in United States throughout, that's where the codling moth is present. So it's pretty much like a temperate fruit growing regions of the world. So that's where codling moth host as well as codling moth can be found. And also that there are some areas where you might find some host, but the codling moth has not established, and especially these lower latitude areas. In some cases, there is also report in Peru, even though it's not unlikely or less likely that codling moth has been established, but there has been some reports of the codling moth established present in there. Still, I think a lot of based on this article that that codling moth presence in there might need to be evaluated or need to look at a little more details, because there are some reports, but it's not 100% sure whether established or not, because it's a tropical conditions, and then codling moth really don't do that well in tropical conditions. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the little bit on the biology side of things on this pest. So they overwinter, codling moth overwinter as a larva on the tree barks and other places, kind of lower surface of the trees, and maybe debris and some other places they found. Overwintering generation, that would be the generation, and they, in the spring, before the spring, they pupate in that location where they overwinter. And then the first flight, they emerge in anywhere from late March through May. So that this time is based on depending on what part of the California we're talking about, right? But it's still on an average, like late March in some years, and other times early April. That's where we're seeing the codling moth activity begins in, at least in the northern San Joaquin Valley. And I do not think that is too much different in the coastal area too. So maybe, a couple of days or so, but I think it's largely the same, more or less same time in the spring they begin to emerge as an adult. So the females are actively, they actively lay eggs, about 30 to 60 eggs per female. That's based on different reports. And most of the time, these female lay eggs on the leaf for apple and pear. And in other cases, they also lay eggs on the fruit. In case of walnut, they lay eggs on the fruit. So they have a 3 to 4 generations per year. 3 strong generations we see all the times in the San Joaquin Valley, in the coastal area, in the foothills. There could be kind of loosely 3 generations, so 2.5 or so. They may not be able to have a strong three generations in certain areas of California, but certainly in the Central Valley, we've seen the strong 3 generations per year. And the most important thing, especially for the pears and apple, all generations and their larvae are important in terms of they are capable of doing damage on those fruits. In walnuts, it's a little different. They still be able to infest on walnuts too, but in terms of causing economic damage in different flights, would be a little different. Okay, so if you go overall life cycle, it's a moth, as you see here, and these moths lay eggs on the leaf and or fruit, and so the hatch, it's about 160 days or so in, so that means it's about a week or 10 days or so. The eggs hatch and a larva burrow into the fruit, and from the fruit they basically feed on the fruit. They exit from the fruit. They come out, and then larvae basically exit from the fruit and makes a cocoon on the bark of these trees. And also other places kind of closer to the soil, that's where they kind of spend their time and pupate there, and the pupation happens, and then the adult emerge again, right? So this is a sort of like a regular life cycle during the season. As I mentioned, there are multiple generations per year. If you think about the late season generations, these larvae, again, they overwinter in these trees, and the pupa occurs in the early spring, and then also the adult emerge in the springtime. And after that, just the cycle continues like that. Yeah. Okay, so since we talked about a little bit about the codling moth, their just basic biology and other things a little bit, but in terms of the IPM of the codling moth, I think one of the things that I wanted to start with is what is IPM, right? So integrated pest management, it's not a one pest management tool. It's the combination of the tools. It's really, actually, it's a decision-making process. It's a decision-based process that involves coordinated use of multiple tactics in order to optimize the control of any pest. In this case, we're talking about codling moth, but other cases, pathogens, weeds, vertebrates, that's also applying there too. And with the notion that it needs to be ecologically and economically sound in terms of whatever we apply in order to manage that pest. So what that means that we need to first identify the pest. What are the principle of IPM? So identify the pest, knowing its biology of the pest. Monitoring tools, regular monitoring of that pest, and as well as the natural enemies, so that we kind of get a sense of population density, what's happening. And also, if there is threshold available, then we can use the threshold in order to make decisions. Other times, even though there is exact threshold, might not be there, but there is tentative adaptive thresholds also available. And those kind of things will be applied in order to make any kind of control method or decisions to manage this pest. And so when managing this pest, we wanted to integrate the multiple tactics, mostly start with the preventative measures, cultural, biological based, less more benign methods first, and then use the suppressive control methods as a later, and that includes the insecticide. So what is the ultimate goal of the IPM? It's basically the IPM concept we started in order to reduce the use of pesticide, or in other words, use the pesticide only if needed, based on the different criteria that I explained, based on the monitoring, based on the population density out there. And also, while doing so, you protect the environment as well as the human health, because majority of the pesticide that we use ultimately have consequences to the environment and to the population, to the health too. So we wanted to reduce that pesticide use, and then also the IPM doesn't remain as a standalone. It has to come up with some economic savings, right? So if you implement some of the practices, it still has to make sense economically. Otherwise, it's not going to be adoptable. So these are the three criteria that we think about when we think about the IPM. So, so if we kind of looked at those four principles, identifying the pest, find out the monitoring tools, threshold, and then the control measures. Of course, identifying the pest and its damage is important. Sometimes it's obvious, you can see the insect out there and feeding. So that would be something that you already know for some of the pests. But other times you may or may not see that, or even if you see that, whether you may be able to identify it properly or not. And so those are the important aspect of IPM first we need to figure out. So just a little bit of biology of the codling moth. Eggs are laid on the leaf surface, and then they are very small, flat, oval size oval eggs. And then they lay those eggs singly on the upper surface of the leaves near to the fruit, so that whenever they hatch, they can go directly to the fruit and feed on it. Newly hatched larva, which is really, really tiny one. If you think about codling moth, mature codling moth size versus the newly hatched larva, it's about 1/10 of inch. The very tiny one can enter into the fruit through different ways. Sometimes they enter into from the fruit side. Other times most of the time they enter through the stem end of the fruit as well as calyx end of the fruit. So those are their kind of preferred place to enter into the fruit when they hatch. So when they start feeding on it, going inside, they have different stages of the larva, and they just keep feeding on it, making a tunnel inside the fruit. So what are the symptoms we see in the fruit that are infested? So you can see the deep tunnels into the fruit. We can see the brown frass, that's the excrement, and some of these examples, you can see them there. And the frass coming out from the fruit. Other times you can see may not be that obvious frass like this one here, or this one here. You may or may not see that obvious frass, but other time you can see the stinks, like the smaller feeding spot on the side of the fruit. And that could be due to these larvae just kind of start feeding on it, on that portion of the fruit, and they feel like they may not be able to feed on it, and they just kind of move around. Either these larvae will die, or they can go again and then find the calyx or the stem end and then feed on it. But they still leave some sort of mark, as you see in here. It's kind of like already healed, but a little bit shallow feeding wound that you can see in here, to call sting. So you can see, these different things when you looked at the fruit. And some of the example are here in these pictures. So this is Washington State University put together this ID, the fact sheet, and then that's where I got these pictures from. These are really, really helpful. So this is stemming. You can see the holes in different places in these pictures. You can see the calyx end, and you can see the holes in there, the frass coming out from there. Sometimes you can see the holes that larva goes in, and then also the holes that they came out. For example, here in this picture, figure 11B, you can see the larva started feeding on it, tunneling into, and then coming out through this hole, right? So these are some of the, and also another thing about the codling moth, which is a little different than the oriental fruit moth, which is the pest of almonds too, the apple too. When they feed on, they kind of continue doing and go directly into that seed area in the middle part. That's a nature of the codling moth versus oriental fruit moth. When they feed on the flesh on the and mostly on the outside of that core seed area. Not all the time, but this is kind of general criteria you can differentiate codling moth versus oriental fruit moth. Again, codling moth goes deeper into seed in the middle, versus the oriental fruit moth is a little bit more peripheral than that. So that's why we identify these different damage if you don't see the actual codling moth. So that's ID part, the insect monitoring. That's another critical factor. So as I said, these insect has the multiple generations, and all generations tend to do the damage. So that's why it's critically important to figure out when that generation, that first generation will start, when this finish, and when the another generation will start. And all of that kind of timing is really critical in order to manage this pest. And so one of the tools that we can use is, of course, we can use some of the traps that we have as a monitoring tool. So that give us idea about what's flying, when they're flying, that kind of information. Plus also, we will be able to, based on using these trap counts, and we'll be able to use the accumulated heat units in order to predict when these different generations will finish and then when the another generation will start. So so for that, we use the criteria, something called the biofix, which is again in the very early in the season, in the spring, when the carding moth begin to fly. When we see the consistent number of the caps of the carding moth in the traps, and then the nighttime temperature is sunset temperature is 62°F or more. If those two criteria fulfill, then that would be the date that we call the biofix. Again, that's the event, that's the time that when we begin to accumulate these heat units in order to predict when the different stages of that generation will happen. So why its degree days are important? Because calendar days, we can use the calendar days, but that's not going to be accurate, because insect development and growth is highly dependent on the temperature. So because there are cold-blooded animals, or so because of that, the environmental temperature, whatever out there, ambient temperature, influence their body's growth and their insect growth and development. So in doing so, when we have, temperature 75 maximum today versus 95 maximum temperature tomorrow, definitely that 95 will trigger a lot more growth to that insect versus 75. So the calendar days is the same, but we are dealing with the different sets of heat units that influence the carding moth growth and development. And so in order to be accurate to accurately predicting this carding moth different stages, we need to follow the heat units, not the calendar days. And that heat units, we call degree days, something we call degree days. And it's calculated based on their, lower threshold temperature as well as the upper threshold temperature, and kind of calculate using those two temperature criteria. Okay, so now we learned that, how to identify this, and we can use the degree day in order to predict what's happening in different stages of this carding moth, using the temperature, local temperature in the area. And also we do have different traps that we can use. For example, we do have regular pheromone traps we call the 1X lure, which is basically the pheromone in this lure is mimic the female pheromone. So that means that all the carding moth that are attracted to these traps are all males. And so we put these traps using the delta trap, as I see in here, or we do have some other different kinds of trap called the wing trap, and put these lures into these traps. And these traps also have a sticky surface underneath inside. So whenever the moths are flying, they're basically stuck on those sticky traps. And then that's how we'll be able to figure out that early biofix when the moths are begin to fly, as well as we'll be able to track their activity pretty much throughout the season. So there are, again, multiple different kinds of lures also available, but the one that I rely on routinely using in apple walnuts would be the 1X lure. If there is mating disruption in the orchard, then in that case, 1X lure would not catch anything, because mating disruption product will disrupt the male's moth ability to find a female or lure in that case. And so because of that, we will not be able to use a 1X lure to track this carding moth activity, but we'll be able to use the other kinds of lure. For example, there is another one called the CMDA, carding moth and pheromone combined lure, that will attract the both males and females, even there is mating disruption in that particular orchard. So there are different kinds of traps and lures that we can use. But again, the ultimate goal is tracking what is happening throughout the season and calculate basically set the biofix and then calculate the degree. I'll give you some example here. So if anybody, I know that not everybody may or may not be use these because of their scope of their or the size of their operation and other things, but it's good to good to know about these resources that exist. So with the UC statewide IPM program, if you Google run degree days models, then you'll get this page where you can select the particular insect that you're interested in. There is codling moth is part of this too. I highlighted the different one because this was I created for different insect. But any case, so when you looked at this page, you'll be able to find a codling moth here, and you select that codling moth, and if you go on the right hand side, you have that insect selected. Then you need to select the which county you are in. You need to select the biofix date, which is given by the temperature, the traps that I described earlier. Once you set that biofix, as we know, that biofix in here, and you can basically pretty much calculate, and with that temperature from that station on that county, it gives in the option in there, then you'll be able to predict the heat units a degree day. This is what I ran today, the earlier today, is that this is a denier, that's a station, CIMC station that um, that model utilizes. And again, this is the Modesto area that I ran, but if you're in a coastal area, you can select your county, you can select the different stations that are closer to you that will be displayed in the forum. So it's a pretty simple. It's just, looks complicated sometimes, but it's pretty simple. If you have any question, you can reach out to me, reach out to Ellie about this one too. So in our area, we have the April 8th as our codling moth biofix. And so from that point on, we're accumulating degree days or heat units like this. And so far, we're May 6th. So we're about 320 degree days for that first flight beginning of that April 8th. So, and this is the trap counts, and this is what the degree day look like in the red color on this axis, and then the trap counts number on the blue color here in the line on y-axis here. So these are the ones that I put the traps. These are the traps that I put in walnut, but it's walnut all apple in general area. If you're in the same general area, it's the same thing. So again, that's how you can calculate the degree day. That's how you can kind of track the flight. So that gives you a better idea about what's happening there. So, so this is from 2016. I just thought that it would be a good example to put in here. So here in the blue color, you can see the codling moth activity. So this is whole thing from here to these two peaks is the first flight. We go here is the second flight, and then there's the third flight. And so when you start accumulating degree day, you'll go a certain point, and then it's after that point that flight is done. So you basically reset your biofix and again start accumulating that way. Reset your biofix and accumulating that way. So if you looked at the generation length for codling moth, first generation is about 1,060, second generation 1,100, and third generation 1,200. So with the trap counts and these numbers, you'll be able to say, how many generations you have, or where you are in terms of these generations within the season. It also provides a little bit of guidance about the spray timing. Early season spray, early generations, you spray around 250 or 300 or do any kind of control measures. Later generation 250. So this is mostly for the insecticide type of application. But if you think about mating disruption, cultural control, other things, so we'll talk about that a little later. But this is, this is a guidance that these degree day provide for the growers to time appropriately when to apply an insecticide. The reason is that because the eggs are out there in the leaf. So the larva will basically hatch and then go into the fruit and then goes in. So once the larva is inside completely, you can't do anything about it, right? So it's already too late. So for finding that critical time when majority of these moths are laying eggs and then the larvae are hatching, is critically important in order to have an effective insecticide control if they use the insecticide. And it also helps understand what flight we're in, what kind of damage we'll see, what type of sampling that I need to do in these codling moth crops and etc. In apple, etc. As I said, so that's the monitoring part, but also you could also do fruit sampling, especially in the later part of these generations, when you have a lot of activity happening out there, you can go and basically collect the fruit. UCCE IPM recommends about 200 fruits you can collect from throughout the orchard. In the area that might be, you think, the hot spot or the any other areas that is more like a border. So you kind of collect these fruits and then look for the damage. And if you have the damage really high, exceeding 0.5, then you might want to apply the insecticide in addition to if you're using mating disruption and other things. Also, there might be possibility of doing some border spray too if there is need for that. Again, I'm just giving you some of the context based on the fruit sampling method that developed through the UCCE IPM. Also, at the end of the season, you can also collect the fruit and then look at how much percentage damage you have, whether the material that you're using last year, mating disruption, culture break, any other material, the method that you use, whether they work well or not, and reassess your plan for next year. So it's always good to have in-season damage assessment as well as at the end, at the harvest sample assessment also. Okay, so now moving on to the management options. So I know I don't have too much time because we wanted to do a little bit more discussion, but still these are some of the methods that we have available. For example, biological control is the thing that you may or may not be able to do the biological based control measures by releasing them, but also you could do it. There are predators, there are natural enemies inside the orchard. If you select the insecticide that are less harmful to them, then you promote the biological control and that type of thing. Cultural control is also another aspect that I've talked about, insecticide control. And there are organic orchard where there might not be all the insecticide. Well, there are selective insecticide you can use and other things that you could do in there. And plus, of course, the mating disruption. So I'll go one by one with this. So the cultural and mechanical control, sanitation is really important because, as we discussed, they feed on inside the fruits. And so whenever you remove this infested fruit, that will help. Sanitizing the orchard is always a good thing. Sometimes you have the other trees in the bordering or abandoned trees that trees or orchard. If you can remove those, that will help also, but it's not all the time possible given the context, right? Any kinds of other things like, for example, picking bins or the fruits and wood piles and other things out there that these codling moth larvae utilize in order to overwinter there. So if you remove those, so that would also reduce the infestation, right? Other times in a small scale, you'll be able to do the fruit bagging, basically preventing the larva coming into the fruit. But there is timing for that, needs to be also be accurate so that you're not bagging after the larva is already entered, right? Also other practices, some of these, if you have a smaller trees or a couple of trees and things, there is a whole entire tree also netting is also options also people are using. Some of the researchers have shown that efficacy of that. The other reliable practice could be the cardboard banding. So in other words, they overwinter in these and pupate in these cardboard or on the barks of the tree and etc. So if you give them this corrugated cardboard, put it into the limb or places, then when they start finding out about the pupation site, that's where they go and settle it. And you can remove them and then destroy them, right? So that could be one way. The other way people are using it as also the monitoring tool, not necessarily control tool. Of course, you won't have 100% control with these, right? So it's anything you could do in terms of reduce the population would be what we're looking for in these practices. The mating disruption, the idea, the concept for the mating disruption is that the female moth produces the pheromone and male moth will follow that pheromone plume and mating occurs. So if you have these artificial pheromone that we apply in the orchard, that mimics female pheromone. So in that case, there will be thousands of plume coming, and most of the time, these codling moth males will follow this false trail that is actually coming from these mating disruption dispenser, not from the female. And so that in that case, the male moth have a lot difficulty in finding the female. They're delayed mating, no mating. So all of that would contribute to reduce the population of the codling moth. And it's a very, very effective, highly recommended technology. It's a green technology, though no issue with that contribute to sustainable production of the apple. There is no reentry interval, PSI, and all of that, right? With the pheromone, it's a green product in that sense. So it's a good thing in that regard. You don't have to, hopefully, not have to apply insecticide when you use the mating disruption. There are different kinds of the mating disruption available. I don't want to talk too much of detail on this because there are so many different things. There are commercially available companies. These products are commercially available that various companies produce. There are sprayable, like you put in a tank and a spray type of product. There are plastic or hand applied dispenser, which range of things. Some are twist ties type, others are ring type, others are meso type. That you can hang into the tree, and then that release the pheromone slowly, and disruption happens. Also, there are relatively newer aerosol dispenser where these canister, you can see in these pictures, the canister that full of pheromone goes into that cabinet of where there is a system where the pheromone is released at nighttime in a certain interval because the moths are active at night. And that will disrupt the mating also. So these are different options, and so not all options fit into all situations, but I think the bottom line for the mating disruption, you need to have enough good size of the orchard where you can use the mating disruption pheromone, and these pheromone will saturate that orchard, it will be more effective, versus if you have 1 acre, then these mating disruption may not be that effective, right? So if you have 3 or 4 acres, you might want to use this multiple source point pheromone, like where you can apply 20, 30, 200 per acre, versus if you have, big orchard, 40, 50 acres, 100, 200 acres. In that case, you might be okay with doing the aerosol dispenser, which dispenses the pheromone in the orchard. So again, it depends on what type of the production system you have, and then you can get more information from this company and from other people later also. Okay, so insecticidal control. There are multiple different insecticide commercially available used in conventional pesticide, conventional orchards. Majority of them are larvicidal. For example, if you look at chlorotranilprole, cyantranilprole, these are the larvicidal products. So they are relatively narrow range product, versus some are relatively broad spectrum, like a lambda cyhalothrin. So when you select these insecticide, you want to select the one that has less impact to natural enemies, less impact to other beneficial, but it still targets the codling moth. in there. So you definitely have to have a conversation with your pest control advisors or any other people in order to figure out which one is best choice. And also the timing, right? So you can't use the one insecticide all the time because that is the recipe for developing the resistance to these insecticides. So you want to rotate them for if you are applying in a one generation, second generation, third generation, then you want to rotate also. And also, ultimately, you need to also look up your economics of product too. So these are some of the things that these are some of the insecticides listed in there. If you have moderate to low pressure, then these are some of the options out there. There is a new one, Spare Lep plus Lep Protect. So this is a more biological based insecticide, but it might, might wanna you might sometimes combine with the Intrepid methoxyphenazide and then get a good control. Methoxyphenazide is IGR, insect growth regulator. So again, depending on the need, these insecticide might be useful. For the organic production system, there are granulosis virus, not only the one product, but there are multiple products right now available, and you can use it too. So the granulosis virus is the naturally occurring virus that's causes disease to the larva of the cardinal moth. So you can commercially apply these products. One thing to think about is that larvae need to ingest these the virus in order to be effective. So the coverage is really, really critical, and especially when the larvae are on the calyx side of the fruit, then getting those the product into there should be a priority, right? So again, it's not the insecticide itself, the effectiveness matters. The most important thing is that how we can get these products into the target is critically important, and understanding what product works, what is their mode of action, how they work into in the fruit. These are all important aspects. Also, we have spinosad. This is also the product interest, which is commonly used product organic production system, but also it's disruptive to natural enemies. So again, organic doesn't mean that it will give you solid everything. So, but it kills the natural enemies as well. Sometimes narrow range oil, it helps a lot if you have low pressure situation, and just apply to that suffocate larva as well as the egg. So that helps. Clay, kaolin clay surround is also a very good product. And also there are sterile insect release. You can release the sterile carding moth into the orchard and get basically when the wild and the sterile moth mate, then they don't have fertile population. So again, these are some of these options out there. You need to select based on your specific requirement, size, and your purpose of your production system. All of that is important factor to know. Okay, so I think at least I want to keep the 10 minutes for the discussion. So in summary, as you know, the codling moth is important pest for these apple, pear, and many other crops. Understanding its biology itself, its overwintering habitat, and etc. Monitoring tools, what's out there, what's available is important for IPM adoption. And also the management tools, not only the insecticide, but also most importantly, but the other cultural control, what biological control options out there, what you can do in your trees in order to protect from these codling moth, like using bagging or using these corrugated the bands on the tree would all are options that you can utilize in order to achieve the IPM. Mating disruption is certainly a very good and promising options, and a lot of growers, in fact, majority of the growers that I deal with in here use the mating disruption and use some insecticide, maybe sometime, maybe just a border in one or two flight. But they have a mating disruption as a core practice for managing carbon in their production system. Okay, well, that's all I have. I know it's I went fast, and even doing so, I only have about 10 minutes left. So I know that not everyone, maybe I went fast, so it may or may not be clear for every aspect of things, but you can always follow up, we can always discuss, follow up, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I know I learned a lot. I'm going to give folks some time to put any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So there's two options there. So I'll give folks a little bit of time to think about it. Please feel free, just put your questions in. In the meantime, I actually had a couple questions. So one, I was wondering which insecticides, are available for backyard growers versus commercial. I think there's probably some differences there in terms of which products are um, available for commercial versus non-commercial folks. And I know that's a question that I've been asked before. So yeah, just wanted to
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very good question. Sometimes that we're not clear about, availability of different insecticide and things, right? So one thing that I wanted to make it clear is that if they're doing any business, or if it's commercial production system, then it goes to with the permit from the agriculture commissioner office. They need to have at least a private applicator license in order to apply any of that insecticide, any of that. In order to buy those insecticide, you need to have permit from this vendor. So that's for the commercial setting. Even though people have 1 acre, half acre, it doesn't really matter. If you use for commercial purpose, then it has to have that license. But for the homeowner, anything, sometimes the insecticide, they are available in the vendors also, but for the home use, also, of course, all the garden store like Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, and all other places, you can find these active ingredient available in there too. For example, the spinosad is available in the outside of there too, but it will be different name and different different trade name, and so you need to look closely what's written there, what is active ingredient is, and so that's how you can differentiate. But again, for the homeowner, those are the options to go and get different insecticide.
Awesome, thank you. It looks like we've got a question in the Q&A and a couple in the chat, so I'll let you, choose which ones to answer first. Yeah, take it away.
Let me see. Do the mating disruption affect any other insect, non-target moth? The answer is no. Well, so the codling moth and oriental fruit moth, usually in a commercial setting, the codling moth and oriental fruit moth, both pheromones comes together. Commercially, the majority of the vendors sell together, so it's as a combo product. So in that case, you are affecting that oriental fruit moth also, disrupting oriental fruit moth also, right? So codling moth plus oriental fruit moth. But other than that, if they don't have the pheromone for that species specific, then it won't affect, because pheromone is species specific, so it would not affect the other species. Okay, so that's okay. So well, I don't know. Okay, so now I can go to the chat, I guess, right?
Thanks. Yeah, that'd be great.
Let me see. Okay, so okay, so best time to remove the cardboard on tree trunks. Yeah, very, very good question. So that's a tricky, right? So I didn't cover in detail. But I think the notion of these cards putting into the tree is that providing the shelter, providing the pupation site for the larva. So when you apply them, need to apply after the larval period, and we need to remove before the again next generation's larvae begin to begin to go there. So we need to kind of think about that as a shelter for the different generation larvae. And so when we apply them, we need to have a better understanding of the generations and cycles when this occurs in different areas and apply based on that. So in other words, you might need to consult, grower might need to consult with their pest control advisors and find more information about exact timing, because you wanna put it there and remove it and to destroy it in order to get a good control. Okay. So the other one is my neighbor 50 feet away ignores his tree and then breeds codling moth. How to protect from that? Well, really, really good question. I know that in the valley too, similar situation now with a lot of different pests there, because there is a lot of abundant orchard and it's causing a problem. I mean, in this case, if it's next door, then I think the best way is to talk to them. Talk to them and then kind of genuinely mention that, this is what happens in insect and things and how we can help and that kind of thing. And sometimes if you have orchard, and if you're using mating disruption and grower is not using your neighbor is not using, maybe in that case you can have a conversation. Hey, can I also use, if it's a small portion, if you're bigger, small portion of orchard with the mating disruption in can I apply in your orchard too? Depending upon the scenario, but I would say that have an open conversation is really important. It's really important because if you don't communicate, then they even might not know, right? So there are a lot of growers, they have an orchard and then they just bought the orchard and they don't know nothing about managing them. um, so it could be that scenario. So it's communication is really important. Let's see. Many of the West County have old trees with a hollow trunk and a split trunk. Perfect host for the overwintering. Wrapping with the cardboard is possible in there. Something that can be sprayed well, or how deep do fallen apples need to be buried? Yeah, I know. That's one of the drawback of these band, right? So it works best in the smooth surface bark of the trees. When you have these cardboard that you put it into these already kind of broken old trees, then they already have a kind of suitable places for the larva to get in. So is there something that I can be spread well, and how deep so fallen in? For the fallen fruit, I don't know the exact answer, but I think as long as you deep into the soil, I don't think that codling moth would do that well in terms of, if it's buried in the soil, I think you'll be fine in the soil if you do it. But if it's like a just kind of debris and then some of the other kinds of residue and stuff, they still be able to make it back. In terms of oil apply, for me, I think the oil application, if you really drench and then hit to the larva, there might be some effect on that. But for me, the oil application would be something for the egg, as well as the very young stage of the larva, much more effective. Okay, so I don't know how long I keep going. I think
Oh, take your time. Yeah, go for it. I think
Oh,
we can
okay,
take
good,
another
good,
10
good.
minutes at least. Yeah. These are good questions.
Yeah, I tried using cardboard and animal stored all of them bands of with the days. Okay, yes. Oh, that's a difficulty. Um, well, I don't know, to be honest, how to protect them from the animals. But I can see that's a genuine concern. Um, what did the CMDA combo lure stand for? Okay, yeah, sorry. CMDA means codling moth, and DA means this is a caramon that is derived from the pear ester in pear. So basically, DA is a name of the two people that basically discovered these pheromones, so that's why they put the DA. But essentially, it's a cardamom, which is a pheromone combined with a chiramon, and so when they combine them, the effectiveness would extend not only for male but also for female. So it's like both male and female capture. So it has a pheromone as well as some pheromone that they use as attractant. Do you advise again wood chip mulch around apple tree? Hmm. Um, in terms of, I think that the question is about whether they use the wood chip as a overwintering. I don't know the 100%, but I think in my experience, my sense is that codling moth, they're still very picky in terms of where they overwinter and colonize compared to some of the other insect that I deal with. So just the wood chips on the ground, I don't know whether they will necessarily go there and overwinter utilize. So I see they have a less impact on codling moth increased population with the wood chips. So I would think that wood chips probably it's okay to apply. So are these spray dangerous to domestic animals or bees? Any that are not? Okay. Well, so when you talk about the insecticide, they can be, they likely, not all are dangerous to bees, but that's why we have the different options. And then I would consult that with whenever you looked at the label of this insecticide, please follow those labels, and it has all the information there. Plus, also you can consult with your pest control advisors and figure out which one is appropriate, because not all the times the one insecticide, even though it's effective, it makes sense to apply later in the season versus the same insecticide early part of the season, because it may kills the other beneficial insect and things. So later in the season, it's a lot more better to use those kind of insecticide than the early part of the season. So I think you need to have a little bit more information and follow the label. It's a label is the law, so it definitely have to look into the detail onto that particular insecticide. You offer plastic dispenser as a suggestion to disrupt mating, and then said that average 20 to 200 can be applied per acre. This is a big difference. Okay. Yeah, I know. I kind of blend it all together. Well, so there are different types, right? So one is called the meso dispenser. It's the plastic dispenser impregnated with the pheromone. There are twist ties type. Those meso dispensers goes only about 20 per acre. And if you looked at these small twist ties or the ring type, those are the ones goes a lot higher number than the other one. So I basically lumped all the hand applied together. But when you really need to apply for it, you need to explore more. And you can also follow the UCCE IPM guidelines for codling moth in apple. And it also give you a little bit more breakdown into it. But also, most importantly, talk to or find out about, with your pest control advisors, or consult with some of us, or, so that you'll know which one would be the best fit, because there are these different product might be suitable for different contexts too. So yeah, but that's a very good question. I think that's all I can see now.
Thanks. Yeah, looks like we have a couple more in the Q&A. I
Oh,
think that first one about CMDA was answered. Arden asks, in NorCal, when should we put the cardboard around the trees? So kind of the other end of the question that Wendy asked about when to take them down. So when to put them up.
yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on which flight you're targeting, right? So if you're targeting for the overwintering flight, that would be, you should put into sometime in the winter, so that when the pupation happens, when the larva move for the pupation, then that's when they will be stuck in there. And then so after that you need to remove, and then so right now, so we're seeing the flight right now, what, first week of April we started, so it's keep going through May or so. So another time to apply that would be kind of end of that, maybe around like end of May, June, around that time, so that these larvae, when they are ready to overwinter, goes into. Again, I think it's just gonna be varies by the region to region. So if you get some information about when the generation potentially ending in different regions, then that will give us that will give you better idea about when to apply. Okay, so that's that. Are there varieties of apple that is bittering, cider, or waxy apple that are resistant to codling moth? I do not know. I think resistant is very. Um, I mean, there might be some apple variety that are more susceptible than others for various reasons. So I don't know there are any apple variety that are a lot more resistant. I mean, I don't know. You might, yeah. So I don't think that, there might be some variety are a little more tolerant than others. It also depends on the when the harvest happens, right? So whether they exposed to that, a couple of generations, or they exposed to one or two generations if it's early versus late. So yeah. Okay, so okay, that's that other variety. Okay, so yeah, I don't know whether the bittering cider or the waxy apple would be something that that part I don't know. Yeah, maybe I need to find more and send that to you. Are carding moths active at night, attracted by lights? They're active at night. Insects are in general at nighttime because they fly at nighttime. They fairly attracted to light. Um, we see that for the other insect like navel longum and other insect too. So as a moth and at nighttime flying, yeah, they are fairly attracted to light. Um, but I don't know whether that light would be, you know, anything enough to use as a control method. Probably not. And also, when you have light, then you can probably capture all kinds of other beneficial insect and other things a lot more than the calling moth. So that might not be the best option too. So.
And it looks like we have one more in the chat, and then I also have one more question. It'll be brief, but Brandon's asking, any particularly good beneficial insects to help with control?
So one of the things that, well, there are two that is commonly we refer to. I mean, there are, spiders and some assassin bugs and other things. Codling moth also overwintering larvae. The earwig also feed on them in the wintertime. So those are some of the generalist predators. But the one that in season we talked about is syrphid fly. So syrphid fly larvae, they feed on codling moth. And also there is a parasitoid, which basically there's a little tiny wasp that lays on the larva of codling moth, and instead of codling moth surviving, basically there are these wasp larvae will feed on the codling moth. It's called Aphytus. And so these Aphytus parasitoid and syrphid fly, they are very, very common in orchards. And so that's why when we select these insecticide or think about the natural enemies at the orchard, we need to be very careful about what to apply and when to apply, so that we can protect them from there, because those are also these are also the parasitoid. They can also these are also generalist parasitoid generalist predator that also feed on the aphid, like woolly apple aphid. So when you have broad spectrum insecticide applied, and these predators and parasitoid are um, um, basically killed, then that's not a good situation too, where you can have the woolly apple aphid flare up. So that's another consequences of the broad spectrum insecticide. So selecting one would be good.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged to hear about how the pheromone, the mating disruption approach is species specific. That seems pretty special and unique in many ways. I just had one more quick question. You mentioned spear lep plus lep protect. I might not have gotten that right, but it looked like that was said BT in parentheses. Is that a bacillus-based product? And if so, is it organic, or are there any organic formulations of it?
Yeah, so I mean, BT itself is a good product, but this one is Spearlep it's a peptide product. It's a biological based and it's a benign product in terms of their impact with natural enemies and other things. So it's gaining a pretty good traction in different in controlling lepidopterans, but I don't think that it's registered as an organic option. So yeah, it's a very good product, biological based, but at the same time, it's probably not organic certified. BT is, but BT they have to combine Spearlip plus BT. They have to combine because it's the BT when ingested, it creates the environment in the gut where the Spearlip will act upon that. So if they don't combine the BT, then it won't work. So it's kind of like combo product.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for explaining that. Okay, if there's no other big questions for Jhalendra, I think I'm going to, oh, we got one more. Okay, last one for real this time. Brandon asks, is there a better recommendation for the trichogramma wasp species? And then he lists some in parentheses.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, if there is option for applying the trichogramma wasp, um, um, and if you can get it commercially, I think that's a good option. In the area where I deal with, I don't know, people are not commonly use it. But in a small scale scenario where when you are growing organically or with a less broad spectrum insecticide, that is definitely a possibility um, of using the trichogramma. Yeah, they're effective parasitoid.
Okay, thanks. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section. So I have a very short PowerPoint that I'm going to share real quick with IPM anecdotes for codling moth from growers in our region who are not able to be here today in person. It's a very busy time of year, but they gave me permission to share some quick anecdotes and photos illustrating a lot of the things that Jhalendra has talked about. And then I'll hand it over to Nick, who is a PCA after that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, does that look good to everyone? Okay, so a couple of minutes on codling moth anecdotes from our region, based here in Sonoma County. So, I just want to point out we have really diverse site characteristics and microclimates in our region, different scales, goals, and site-specific opportunities and constraints across a lot of different apple orchards here in Sonoma County. And, I found through talking to a lot of growers that, many of you have been experimenting and fine-tuning IPM for codling moth in really site-specific ways for a long time in some cases. So I wanted to highlight some examples of how growers innovate and tailor their IPM to their own specific context. So all of this is being shared very kindly with permission from the growers. And I might mention some products, but they're just examples and not endorsements. Okay, so to begin with, Ted Richardson, Bella Ridge Farm. So he, pictured here in his orchard, he grows about 300 palm fruit trees, makes production on around 2 acres, tons of pollinator and beneficial insect habitat. As you can see here, the cover crop in between rows is a nice example of that. And codling moth damage here has ranged from 2 to 10% over the years. So, Ted has experimented with a lot of different IPM strategies, which is great. And he's done mating disruption with Pacific Biocontrol Isomate CM plus dispensers for 16 years, as well as Sutera puffers in the last 4 years. More recently, he's used Side X, the codling moth virus, most years. He's done 1 spray of Entrust in some years and Trichogramma wasp release in some years. And he's also tried beneficial nematodes once as well. So this is just a really nice example showing how great local grower has tried a ton of different strategies, and just identified and evaluated what really works best in this context. Also, in a larger pear orchard, he found that starting the use of pheromones helped reduce codling moth damage from over 30% to less than 10%, which is a massive change. So, a lot of folks work in multiple orchards in our regions, including Ted. So he encourages apple growers, really broadly at any scale to focus on sanitation, like Jhalendra talked about. If you're able to, especially on a small scale, if you can go through and pick off, the apples with stings on a regular basis, thinning fruit to singles can help too. He's seen really good results on small scale with kaolin clay, which disappears if you use it, just on that first generation earlier in the season. And also he's encouraging everyone to look at pupation sites like old bark, apple bins, and places where codling moth might be overwintering. Okay, so now, excuse me, some notes from Dave Hale of Hale's Apple Farm, also Sonoma County. Dave has used IPM at his farm since 1979. He has 16 acres of apples at the moment. In the last decade, he's had minimal codling moth damage in apples at his farm. And he said the key to control is understanding the codling moth life cycle, vigilance, and timing of application materials. So more common themes and strategies that Jhalendra talked about as well earlier. So here's Dave. I got the pleasure to go out and see the orchard, and he showed me, some codling moth traps and how he goes through and monitors. So Dave's strategies include pheromone attractant and sticky traps to monitor moth activity. He times the spray just prior to egg hatch with the booster applied 10 to 12 days later. The spray material has minimal residual, so a follow-up is needed for control, and he continues to monitor and keep fresh pheromone in the traps until mid-September. Some notes from Dave. So, timing really matters. The first generation usually appears in April during Gravencine bloom. That can be 3 to 5 activity periods from April to September, like Jhalendra mentioned. Dave has found that an IPM system, he's created an IPM system, through trial and error that provides really good control, less than 1% damage at his farm. Over the years, just a lot of experimentation at his specific site. His trap counts are significantly lower than in past years, he mentioned, and that serves as an indicator of flora activity. So here's just some more photos from the field, fresh sticky traps, the Tracy traps, and then a little bit later, a couple days later, starting to find, I guess in this case, 4 codling moths on this trap. So this is what this looks like in real life from an orchard nearby. A couple more notes. He rotates modes of action of spray materials to minimize the risk of resistance. He tries to use bee-friendly materials for the first generation, especially of codling moths, since it usually occurs during bloom. He said the most difficult application is once harvest begins in August, because you need to stay ahead of the pre-harvest interval of the spray material that he uses, while also providing adequate coverage of the apples that mature in October. And so just, common theme from a lot of farmers, growers I've talked to, it's not easy, it's not consistent. Every year is a little bit different. So you need to monitor really precisely at your site. Codling moth activity can be really different in the south of Sevastopol versus Grayton, which are really not that far apart. So you can have big differences. So that's why monitoring at your specific site is really helpful. Big take home message from Dave, just please be proactive, get out there, look at your traps on a regular basis, take proactive measures. Canneries are no longer present, near his orchard, and I think throughout a lot of Sonoma County. And previously, those canneries used to have hundreds of wooden bins where codling moth would overwinter. So that is like a a local historical piece of context there. We don't have that as much as we used to. And he also said that most of the nearby orchards that were not cared for are no longer a source of insect infestation close to his particular orchard because they have been removed and converted to vineyards. So that's just another factor in terms of how our landscape is changing. A couple notes from Dan Ivaldi, who's a PCA with Wilbur Ellis for over 18 years. Many of you might know him. He works with the Duttons on apple management. There were many years of lower pressure, Dan has told me, but last year in particular had really high codling moth counts throughout California, including the Central Valley, and a lot of growers incurred damage. And so he really encourages the use of that degree day model that Jhalendra walked us through to use the science in your IPM approach. Organic materials are really costly, he pointed out, and have short residual activity. Again, more common themes I'm hearing from a lot of growers on those points. So even though many applications were made last year, a lot of crops still had damage, unfortunately. So this is a tricky one. A couple notes from Doug Snide, another local PCA who is now retired. So Doug offered some more input. He said that the amount of the abandoned orchards in our area makes it really difficult to manage codling moth, especially in the Sebastopol region. Late season varieties like Romes are hit really hard by codling moth, while varieties that are harvested earlier, like Ravensteins, may have less damage. And I just wanted to tie this back in with that question about resistance. We don't have, I'm not sure off the top of my head if there are specific apple varieties that are inherently resistant. I saw a comment in the chat that maybe there are, which would be great and definitely something we should talk more about. But that aside, we know that, if we can harvest some varieties earlier than others, we're removing them out of the field earlier. We're reducing the amount of pest damage and cycles that these fruit are exposed to. So it's not really resistance per se, but it is a factor for thinking about early harvest versus late harvest varieties. Those late harvest varieties are probably going to get hit a lot harder than the earlier ones like Ravensteins. Okay, so Doug also said that the small scale of a lot of orchards and the slopes and hillsides and terrain can really make pheromone mating disruption for codling moth quite difficult. In those situations, it can be hard to get good enough coverage and saturation to confuse them. And just, wanted to reiterate that IPM is always the goal. It can look a little bit different depending on your situation. Also, I have some resources here. This is what Jhalendra shared earlier. Pardon me. I also have a bunch of other links and resources. I'll share this PowerPoint with everyone who attended as well. So you all will have access to this, these UC IPM resources, and a couple from Washington State as well. So I just wanted to take a minute or two on that. I really appreciate the growers who shared all of this with me, taking the time to catch me up to speed on what this looks like in our region for growers. So thank you, everyone. You know who you are. I really appreciate it. And so, yeah, I think now we can move on to Nick. So I'm going to hand it over to PCA who's joined us. His name is Nick, and I'll let you introduce yourself. So take it away. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Sysock. I'm a pest control advisor and certified crop advisor in the North Coast, predominantly working with wine grapes, but I do have some growers who are pear growers as well. Right now, we're probably down from the 14,000 tons we used to farm back in the 90s of pears to probably, I think we're only at like 2,000 or 3,000 tons of pears that are farmed here. And currently, kind of going over the notes of what was going on there with codling moth. Typically, we're starting the season with putting some traps out kind of mid-February, timing with temperatures to see when we're going to get a flight. So typically the first flight of moths we get are starting at the sunset temperatures of 62 degrees. So when you have those sunset temperatures at 62 degrees and those warmer days, that's typically when we're going to get those first flights. So for us, our biofix day was April 11th. And you can use the UCIPM website to calculate your degree days, or if you're part of the Western weather, I don't know if Sonoma County has it, but for Mendocino County, we have it, and you can set up a custom report for calculating your degree day hours. So for us, like right now for the Ukiah Valley and Scotts Valley, which is in Lake County, we've got 210 days of cumulative degree days for Ukiah and only 190 for Scotts Valley. So we are timing our 2 different sprays, going out with basically a broad spectrum, not broad spectrum, but we cover everything up, because if we have any codling moth that are in the fruit that go to canners, it's considered an X load and it's all garbage, or it is sent back to the grower and they have to pay for the shipping of it. So there's kind of a zero tolerance for our conventional growers because of things that the companies who are purchasing fruit and canning it or processing it have in place for us. So using the degree day accumulation, kind of going on the ID on some of the stuff for the green Bartlett pears that we're predominantly farming, we actually get these things called shiners in the trees. So when you're at that like June, July time period and you look up in the tree and you see these yellow pears, because green Bartletts are typically green when they're picked for canning, they are called shiners, and you can see the frass coming out the bottom. And if you ever see that in a conventional orchard, it's pretty scary. And I've had that happen one time at a grower who didn't want to do anything after we had caught our biofix. We were starting to catch moths again later in the season at about that 2nd generation. And he said, no, I have pheromone hung. I'm not going to do anything. And then we probably lost like 10 or 15 truckloads of pears that I don't know what ended up happening with those pears or how we ended up getting compensated, but there's no conversation after that. I was just trying to monitor what you have. And with going over the pheromone disruption, we're using also 10x lures in ours instead of CMDA combos, so we don't have to identify the different sex of the codling moths that are in the tree. So we typically have the 10x's out there. We have the 1x's as a backup in case we get a flight and the pheromones kind of stop working or something happens. Then we know the 1x, if we get a catch in that there are a lot that are present. But as far as the pheromone goes, there are twist ties you can put in the trees that we do 200 an acre at putting out, and their isomate CTTs are sometimes they don't have them registered in California yet, but they have codling moth and oriental fruit moth combination ties you can put up. For the smaller growers, I recommend doing that, but depends on how big you are. And if you do get them, putting them on the border area too, so you create that entire barrier of pheromones that Jhalendra was talking about. Because if you don't have that barrier and you're just putting those pheromones up, what you could in turn be doing is even attracting more codling moth from the area into your area, because they're smelling the female scent and they're going, okay, like this is the place to party. But when they land in the trees, they have other ways of communicating with each other to actually find and breed within the trees. I mean, the old school method, if you're going to be spraying or making an application of some of these products too, the old school method that my mentor taught me and what they used to do up here was basically May 1st, June 1st, July 1st. Those are the applications of making it with your insecticide for the moths. And that's what they used to do. The old school way was when the pear was up, you'd want to spray before it started turning down. So the arsenic would get fixed at that calyx. And so that when the moths came to feed into the calyx, they'd feel the arsenic first before they got into the actual pear. And that's from another person, another 80-year-old farmer, for what they used to do. Then the moth materials that we use, we have other restrictions that are put into place with what we can apply into orchards, where even though the pre-harvest interval is 2 weeks according to the label, we'll get a list from these companies that say, hey, this product, you have a 90-day pre-harvest interval. And going on the points that Doug Snide was kind of making of those later varieties, luckily for us, when we start harvesting the pears in Mendocino County and Lake County, it is go, go, go. It's like pear harvest, but worse, because you start harvesting at 22 PSI on the pear. And then when you start getting below 18, you start getting docked your pay when you're getting it to the market. And so we put on pheromone or plant growth regulators to actually hold the pears onto the trees longer. And it holds them actually onto the tree so we can get through our harvest longer. As far as when I go through scouting on these things, it is looking at our traps to see where we have the flight of codling moths and trying to just make the applications where necessary. We typically start every single year out and make this application of insecticide, because you don't know when or where they are, but you can kind of look at your initial biofix and your degree days for when they should be out in the orchards. And for us, with the zero tolerance of it, unless you're organic, there's not a reason for us not to be doing something. Unfortunately, that you never want to see the number of pears I've seen with codling moth in a conventional orchard is one orchard, and that orchard, that farmer no longer has it, and it's a mess to clean up. And like some other people are saying, having that mess that you then create for your neighbor, it's not really fun to deal with. As far as that, it's just kind of monitoring. I think Jhalendra did a great job at covering those things. Same thing with the information that Ellie got. I don't know if there's any questions or anything like that that you guys might have.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, let's maybe take a moment and see if anyone has questions specifically for Nick. And while people are thinking about it, I see there is a question in the Q&A about something I mentioned where surround can sort of disappear over time if you use it early on in the season. So I think what was meant by that is just, it's basically over time the fruit matures and grows and you just don't see it as much anymore. The surround, it's so for those of you who don't know, it's a kaolin clay based product, so it's kind of like a solution of clay and looks a little bit like, oh, I don't like sort of whitish, translucent whitish, and essentially, over time you can't even tell it's there after like a month or two. So I think the point there is just if you apply it earlier in the season, you're less likely to see it show up on your fruit later. Yeah, so I hope that kind of answers that. But any questions for Nick?
Or that surround too. It's one that if you have a lot of sunburn, people use it for that, but it's actually creating a physical barrier. So the plants don't have the ability to photosynthesize as much as if it wasn't there. But if you're getting sunburn on your fruit, I know down in like Bakersfield, they'll apply it to apples to reduce the amount of sunburn. And the kale and clay, they'll actually say that in the valley where they put it on like walnuts for sunburn, they'll actually put that on to increase the chilling hours, as well as where we have an insect called a parasilla in the Pacific Northwest. They'll use that as well for trying to create, basically dissuade the scilla from laying an egg on the bark of the tree or on the spurs, because that clay, they don't like the way it feels when they're looking for a site to lay the eggs.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Jhalendra, go ahead. We do have a question in the chat, so let's go, Jhalendra, and
Yeah,
then
well, I was just curious that Nick, very good summary of the IPM practice you're doing. In terms of I'm curious about. Oh yeah, this year, are you seeing more codling moth activity this year as a first flight, or it's kind of more or less similar last year, previous year? What's your kind of general assessment this year?
Yeah, kind of thinking from the warmer weather that we're seeing more moths. The worst orchard that I would be trapping the moths in, that usually would get like 30 moths a year, we haven't caught any in the last 3 years. And in every other orchard, I think we're up to 27 moths trapped. And typically after we get our biofix, we maybe see like 6 or 7. And a couple of years ago, someone abandoned an orchard, and we had one trap that had 137 codling moth in it from an abandoned orchard next door before it was completely plowed out or finally having been burned or worked into the ground. And so we're seeing more caught so far this year, and kind of in turn could have been from our warmer winter that we had. Same thing in vineyards as well, that we're seeing more pests than we typically have coming out earlier than where we normally see them, which is kind of like a ha ha ha, this is a great year for that, but we'll see kind of how it goes.
Yeah. Okay. We'll notice the same thing, and so just curious from the kind of northern side of things, north coast perspective. So thanks.
Then it looks like Tim Bates has a question. And the indications that the puffer system is not working as well as, say, 5 years ago. I've heard rumors and seem to be experiencing it myself. Been using puffers for 15 years or so. I think I use one type of puffer. There's 2 different major manufacturers that use them. We haven't been seeing as many issues, but we've also reduced our number of pear acres that we've actually gone back to hanging the ties in the trees. We have older orchards that are planted anywhere from 1920 to like 1955 or 1965. There's a couple of newer trellis systems, but not as many. And I think our growers are going back to using the ties in the trees because they feel more confident by having a tie in every single tree, depending on your spacing. So by putting out 200 ties per acre and you have 120 trees, you at least have that pheromone in the tree. Or where I've seen some people using puffers, getting those ties as well, and increasing the border with it. So putting out those ties on the prevailing wind side of it to try and increase the border there so that you have more of that flow of the pheromone going into the orchard where the predominant wind is coming from. So that might be one, but they're the two different puffers. The biggest one that I've had are the technology in some of the puffers is so specific now that if it's not a certain temperature, it won't actually emit the pheromone. So I think it's Terra's right now, they have a sensor. So if it gets to below a certain temperature, once you hit sunset times, it won't emit the scent. And the other ones above it will keep going, but they have so much pheromone that people are thinking they're not getting everything out of the canister, but it's lasting like 6 months in the trees, emitting the pheromone. And with the puffers, I'm sure since you've been using them the last 15 years, you've seen that you can actually get phyto if you have it facing into the tree where you get these burn spots where all the pheromone will actually accumulate onto the trees. And so that's one where another grower was tired of seeing that in his trees. And so he went back to the ties and just put those up instead. And then I hope that answers your question there, Tim. And then Brandon, have you noticed bad years to have any connection with weather? Wet winters worse for codling moth? I think this warmer summer is probably the worst of what I've personally seen, that we had a higher amount of moths coming out. But when it comes to where you guys are at in Sonoma County with some of these orchards and the abandoned trees or the hobbyists in the backyard, I know that typically our biofix that we catch is in Potter Valley next to an organic farmer's apple trees that he has next to his orchard. And almost every single year until the last two, that's been our biofix for our county. But the last few years it's actually changed where I think they've been actually going over those trees when they're done making the application on their orchard and making an application with lime sulfur during winter. And it seems to be helping, but I can't really correlate more than that. Granted, I've only been doing this for about 10 years, so I also don't have the historical knowledge that these guys who are retired now, who are 70 plus, who've been doing this for 40 years, have from when it used to be real farming with products that didn't work as efficiently or as effectively as they do now.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nick. I really appreciate it. I can't believe it, but we have about 20 minutes left, so I want to make sure we have some time for Zia and Wendy.
Yep.
So thanks for
guys.
questions. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, so I think we're gonna now move on. Zia, if you wouldn't mind putting your video on. Yes, thank you. Okay, great. Hello, everyone. This is Zia Sonnabend. I'll let you introduce yourself. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Zia. I have a Fruitilicious farm where I grow 8 acres of all kinds of fruits in Watsonville, California, which is in Santa Cruz County, and we're sort of up in the foothills. Of my 8 acres, I have about 4.5 of apples, an acre of pears, and the rest divided between figs, citrus, peaches, apricots, every fruit you can think of, pretty much. So I want to add a couple of points to the IPM guidelines that were given near the beginning because I think they're fairly important. One is to emphasize again the importance of good sanitation. At the end of the cropping year, you need to get all the dropped apples off of the floor. It's not just your neighbors, but every orchard drops a certain amount of fruit, either from improper thinning or pest issues or who knows why, but it's important to get that fruit off of the from underneath the tree because that's where the codling moths do like to overwinter. Another thing is regarding the beneficials. Yes, insects are fairly beneficial, and in order to encourage them, it's important for certified organic growers like myself to incorporate as much biodiversity as possible. So the very first thing we did when we got our orchard was plant a hedgerow along the roadway so that we would have different plants in flower at different times of the year. We used almost all, it's about 95% native plants, with a few non-native such as rosemary and lavender, just to add color and scent. Equal to the job of beneficial insects is the role of birds in controlling codling moth. There is some research on this that birds can eat dozens and dozens of codling moths if you encourage them into your orchard. So I think anything you can do to encourage birds. Now, as a grower of soft fruits, I hate birds that eat the fruit, and I have to put bird netting on all my figs and peaches and stuff. But the birds do eat a lot of codling moths and are very beneficial. I've had the good fortune of the fact that the pheromones, and I use the isomate CTT twist ties, and they work well, even though my orchard is on a fairly uneven slope, but it is contiguous and the apples are all in a group. And so I do have good coverage with the twist ties. When I had another orchard in the past of 10 acres of, my trees are semi-dwarf, and the shorter trees does help the fact that the codling moth, that pheromones can disperse uniformly in the canopy. And my old orchard, which had standard sized trees that were 50 years old and very large trees, we also mostly used the twist ties, but we did have to use monitoring traps there because the late varieties such as Granny Smith and Pink Lady, which we did grow in that orchard, were not sufficiently covered late in the season by the pheromones. And so based on the monitoring the traps, we would often do a spray of Sidex, the granulosis virus, or the other brand, which we could get sometime. That material is very expensive. And so you do want to really look at your models, look at your degree days, look at your traps, make sure that you need it before you actually go ahead and use it. But it did make the difference in getting a late season crop in certain years. Now I have over 50 varieties of apples, so I don't bother with the monitoring traps because the twist ties have done a sufficiently good job throughout the season. I did want to mention a couple of things about some of the questions earlier. We, at my old orchard, we did have a neighbor who had abandoned his trees. We just talked to them and offered to spray them for him, at least a few rows in. So we hung the pheromones about 2 rows deep in his orchard, and every time we sprayed anything, like for scab or anything, we would spray his couple of rows, and he was okay with that. And that's a good approach to have with your neighbors, because usually if they're not taking care of their trees, they don't care that much if you're using organic type controls on them. Also, the question about wood chips. Wood chips are really good for apple trees, and you should be encouraged to use them, especially if they're ramial wood chips, meaning fresh. But don't put them right up against the base of the trunk. Keep them out more in the drip line of the tree, but they provide slow breakdown of nutrients and good mulch as ground cover to help conserve moisture and things like that. So I think those are mostly what I would, just a word about their question about the other sprays affecting beneficials. The granulosis virus is extremely specific for codling moth, so you don't have to worry about that. And of course, the pheromones are extremely specific for codling moth. The things like Entrust and oil are less specific. The oils work by suffocating things on the trunk, mostly on the bark. And so it won't bother bees as long as, you're careful about application of it, because bees aren't hanging out on the trunk mostly. But it will affect anything else that would tend to be on the trunk. I can't really think of beneficials that would be in that situation, so I feel good about using the oil. The Entrust is very broad spectrum, and it has a long reentry interval, 48 hours. And I would only use it in an absolute emergency, which I did have to once on my citrus when they weren't bearing, but that's the only time I've used it. And sometimes we do use a version of it for spotted wing Drosophila on blueberries. But that would be the most broad spectrum of the ones mentioned in the list of organic materials. So I think that's pretty much all.
Thanks so much, Sia. I see. Yeah, we've got a question.
And Wendy's asking if I use trichogramma. I have not. I just encourage the natural beneficial insects for the most part, but because I don't have a codling moth problem. I'd say we're well under, we're about 2%. And my neighbor's orchard, which I take care of, which is 100-year-old pippin trees, it's 2 acres. He didn't even, he wanted to put up the twist ties himself and he didn't put all of them up. And there was maybe 10% or higher last year, but I think it's because he didn't apply them right. Because as someone was mentioning, you need to go thicker, put more pheromones on the very outer perimeter of your orchard, like put them extra to try and keep them from flying into your orchard.
And I know this has come up a couple times, so I'm just going to put a quick link in the chat. Back in the day when I was at Ohio State, I co-authored a short little article about protecting pollinators while using pesticides. So if you're going to go that route, I'm not saying you have to at all, but if you are going to go the route of insecticides, there are some things you can consider to minimize risk to pollinators. It's kind of a big separate topic that could, deserve its own webinar, but UCANR has some really nice links on this as well that I'm going to put in the chat. But yeah, any other questions for Zia? I'm going to look in the Q&A. Okay, great. Carol Flaherty, do I understand correctly that overwintering happens with every generation of moths? I believe so. Does that sound right? I think that's, unless somehow you got 100% control, which would never happen in real life. I think it's safe to assume that there will be some overwintering.
Well, the codling moth in our area has 2 to 3 generations per growing season. So one of the generations overwinters, but the others just happen during the season.
Yeah, good distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, other questions for Zia? I love hearing that, the pheromone that it works even, in an orchard where you're on a slope, and
Mm-hmm. Now, I
nice to
should
hear you.
mention that I am also a backyard grower because I don't live at my farm and I have about 20 trees in my backyard. I cannot use the twist tie pheromones there because you just can't get the confusion effect with only 20 trees. So I do have to use the delta traps and lures to just trap the pheromones in the delta traps. Trap the pheromone, trap the codling moths.
Yeah, I had one more question before we go to Wendy. I was wondering, in terms of sanitation, sorry if you mentioned this, but do you have a preferred way to make sure there are no apples on the ground? Do you do you hand pick them or till them in, incorporate them into the soil?
Yeah.
I guess you have some thoughts.
Well, we used to have a market for apples for the vinegar maker, and then we lost that with Manzana leaving Sebastopol. And so we either pick them up because it's a small orchard, and with 50 varieties, there are never too many ready at once. So we pick them up to make our own juice with, or we rake them into the middle of the rows and then till them in as we're getting ready to plant cover crops.
Okay, cool. Thanks. That's helpful. I'll give everyone one more minute. Any other questions for Zia? I really appreciate you being on this call. I know we have, similar coastal climates, probably a lot in common in terms of what apple growing looks like here and in the Santa Cruz region. Okay, well, I think we'll move on to Wendy now. Thank you so much, Zia. And take it away, Wendy.
There it goes. Yeah. All right. Well, pardon the bright windows on around me here. I'm trying to avoid that. And yeah, thanks for the great presentations. I only have a few things to say, which is fine since we're almost out of time. But from the perspective of a lot of small orchards, home orchards, I've been pruning usually well over 40, home orchards, anything from a couple of trees to, a moderate number. But I've been doing this for 15, 20 years. And then I also, used to help manage the gardens, which included about an acre and a half of very mixed orchard up at the junior college farm, Schoen Farm. And so, what to do on these smaller scales? What do I see home orchardists doing and not doing with regards to codling moth? Just a few comments on that. It's all over the board. It's generally a problem. And some people, I kind of like sometimes wonder why they even pay me to prune their trees, because they're like, well, we can't even use the fruit. There's so many worms. And so, I offer suggestions. Certainly start with sanitation. One option on a small scale that some people have had really good results with is hanging the vinegar molasses trap in the tree. And that recipe is around. I don't think I need to, give the details of the recipe right now, but I basically buy the cheapest apple cider vinegar because it's the smell, I think. It doesn't need to be good apple cider vinegar. And the molasses is the expensive part. So I generally buy a larger jug at a restaurant supply place, and then hot water to kind of dissolve the molasses when I'm making it. And then I add a tad of ammonia. I actually heard somebody say you don't need the ammonia. I always figured that was the part that actually kills them. I don't really know what role the ammonia has. Anyway, you hang it in a plastic jug in the tree. You put the material in the jug, hanging up in the upper canopy of the tree. And when I was on the property I am now, I was a renter for 19 years, and now I've had title for 6 years. And my landlord one year, I remember him saying there was a worm in every single apple on the property. We have a number of apple trees here, and he was so discouraged. I told him about this trap. He tried it the next year. He said that there were 0 worms, and he was completely impressed with me for telling him about this. I know other clients of mine who've had great results. One of the tricks is remembering to refill it during the season, because the molasses kind of coats the trap, and sometimes you can't tell that it's empty. Or just, we get busy and then we forget. So that can help on a really small scale. In terms of fallen fruit, I pick it up, and I have a friend who's a pig farmer, and, or running animals, that eat the apples through an orchard can be very beneficial, if you can manage that. I wanted to specifically give a plug to our friends at Wild Farm Alliance for all that information about the songbirds and the control of codling moth. There's a probably 70-year-old red Gravenstein that's about 15 feet from me right here out my window. And every winter, there's a gazillion little bitty birds, I'm not good at bird ID, that just scour every inch of that tree, picking off little bugs and things. I do usually get some codling moth. And what's interesting, it's an old red Gravenstein, so super early, is that it's usually the earliest ones that have the worm damage. The later ones don't, which is totally counterintuitive. But I think it's because I do hang those vinegar molasses traps, but I'm probably missing the first flight. I've probably been doing it too late. So I'm hearing that. Again, I don't really know otherwise why. I do have one client who does the totally labor intensive route sometimes, and puts every single little apple in one of those little kind of gauzy bags that you use for making your own tea bags. He ordered those in bulk so they wouldn't be too expensive, and very labor intensive, but it works. And let's see, what else can I say? I think that those are the main things that I have observed, of folks trying to deal with this on a home scale. where, that they're not going to spray, and that a pheromone disruption, wouldn't be effective. So what else can they do?
Awesome. Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, I would love to take a moment and see if Jhalendra or really anyone has thoughts on maybe a mode of action behind the molasses vinegar trap situation. It's an attractant, maybe they suffocate in it. Like, really open this up to anybody. Do we have thoughts on maybe the mode of action behind that? Or maybe Wendy, you.
Well, they definitely fly in,
Yeah.
Yeah, the moths just fly in, and then, along some other things do too. So, you end up with this soupy, molassesy, bunch of dead insects, thing in the trap. So I don't know whether it's the ammonia part that I don't know if that's really needed in there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know, Jhalendra, any thoughts on the ammonia component in particular?
Yeah, so I was not 100% clear in the beginning. So is that you mix the molasses with the vinegar and then you hang on the tree, or
Yeah, and water, fair amount of water as well.
and then so that attracts,
It attracts the moths.
okay, so that use as a trap and looks sort of like attract and kill type. Well, I mean, for the moth, generally the codling moth, they don't feed on other stuff other than anything liquid type, right? So when you have these as a trap, there might be, fair number of attracted to that liquidy, and then also the sort of like a scent, because if you think about the molasses, it's sort of like byproduct of the some of the fruit or sugar, right? So that they're tuned to. So that might be the reason that you are, getting some of that. But I'm whether it's a backyard situation, so you might not have a lot of codling moth anyway. So I think in that case, it's
Yeah, I've actually, well, my previous landlord's experience, and one other, I can't remember who, but somebody from last year said they had very bad infestation. They tried this and it made a miraculous difference. So it can be very helpful. I see a comment here about the trichogramma. I have a friend who lives in a fairly isolated bowl, and she has some very old apple trees and some somewhat younger ones. And she said that she obtained trichogramma quite a few years ago, and it just kind of, naturalized in her little area, geographic mini area. And she's had zero codling moth ever since, which I thought was pretty remarkable.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this, more great examples of, lots of different tools in your toolbox, so to speak, and different strategies, trying things out in different situations, different contexts, seeing what works. Yeah, thanks, Laura, for putting that in the chat. That's really good to hear. Any questions for Wendy? We have 1 minute left. Also panelists, if you guys have questions, feel free to just chime in and ask each other as well.
Yeah, I was curious, Wendy. So when you do that for the homeowner, I do you use any type of insecticide or sort of natural, plant-based product or anything like that?
No.
No. Okay.
No. Yeah, I mean, as a, I think that you'd have to be a PCA to do that if someone's paying you to do it. So no, I just prune the trees and have suggestions for, again, adding the habitat for the beneficial insects, creating diversity, using the good sanitation, and then, trying that vinegar molasses trap if they want to give that a try.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. That's great. Oh, one quick question on the Q&A. How many traps for about 5 to 10 trees as an example? And I think that's for you, Wendy.
Oh, well, it depends on the size of the trees. If they're smaller trees, ones that you manage everything by hand without a ladder or anything, you might only need one trap, but one or two if the canopy is very broad. In this big old red grav, I think I've put 2, but probably could use 3 of those. It's a plastic jug. You cut a hole in the top shoulder of the jug to make it easier to fill and so make it easier for them to fly in and out. Well, not out, just in.
Awesome. Thanks for the description. Okay. So it's 5:01. I'm gonna let folks go. I'm actually gonna stick around for another 5 minutes if anyone wants to chat or put more questions in, but I'll let all of our panelists go if you need to be somewhere. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your perspective, your input on all of this. I really appreciate it. I know this pest is a really tough one, so it's really helpful to hear lots of different, perspectives and input on it. So thank you so much for taking the time. So before everyone goes though, attendees, I'm gonna put a quick survey in the chat. So I promise this will only take you 1 minute. So this is just an evaluation survey, and it will provide a lot of feedback for me about, how effective this particular event was for you. And if you have any feedback, there's a place for you to sort of type out feedback as well if you have any. So please just take 1 minute and provide some feedback. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone. Jhalendra, Wendy, Zia, Nick, appreciate it. I'm going to stick around and answer a couple more questions to the best of my ability for another 5-10 minutes or so.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, let's see. Do you get much in terms of unintended target? Yeah, so Brandon, it sounded like Wendy did mention that, yeah, there are some unintended targets. Pretty much any bug that would be attracted to molasses, sugary stuff might be captured by those traps. Thank you, very informative. Awesome, thanks Rachel, appreciate the feedback. Please add that into the survey so I can capture it. I appreciate that so much, thank you. Okay, any other questions, lingering thoughts? Oh, awesome. Thanks, Laura. Appreciate it. Man, one of the funny things about the webinar format, though, is like you guys can't talk to us. And so I'm like, man, maybe next time I should just have this as like a normal Zoom so that I can hear you talk. And I don't know. So if folks would prefer that, put that in the survey too. But thank you, Laura. Appreciate it. Alrighty. Well, I hope everyone has a great evening and best of luck. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you ever have questions about codling moth. I may have the answers. If I don't, I will reach out to Jhalendra, Wendy, Zia, Nick as well. Try not to bug them too much, but yeah, hopefully between all of us, we'll be able to get you answers. So best of luck with everything and have a great evening.